Back in 2011, when Apple introduced Siri, it was billed as a breakthrough feature for the iPhone.
I'm really excited to show you Siri. What is the weather like today?
Here's the forecast for today.
It is that easy.
It wasn't perfect, but it was first.
Siri was a really big deal when it first launched back in 2011 because it was a whole new way to interact with your iPhone. This was actually a pet project of Steve Jobs. He saw Siri demoed as a separate app before Apple acquired the company and was just kind of blown away by what Siri could do. He really saw the long-term vision for this kind of paradigm where you talk to your devices instead of typing. And at the time, it seemed very revolutionary.
But 15 years after it launched, the voice assistant still mishears things, misses context, and now the rollout of a new and improved Siri has been delayed. And last year, the tech giant introduced Apple Intelligence, but critics say Apple has not evolved to meet the new AI standards set by OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, or Amazon's Alexa.
If you look at everything they announced in WWDC last year, a lot of that hasn't come to fruition. They've hit a lot of speed bumps.
Since the November 2022 release of ChatGPT, generative AI has taken off. Tech giants like Microsoft and Google have centered their strategies around large language models, LLMs, from search to productivity. But some say Apple has fallen behind.
You had ChatGPT, you had Anthropic's Claude, and so many other of these artificial intelligence products coming out there outside of Apple's ecosystem, and Apple still hasn't been able to catch up.
Apple's stock has also taken a hit. Over the past 6 months, it's fallen more than 16%, while other tech companies like Microsoft and Google have pushed ahead in AI.
If Apple was as successful in their own pursuits for generative AI as we've seen some of their mega cap competitors, Apple's stock price would be higher than it is today.
In November 2023, during an interview with CNBC, Apple's hardware leaders insisted the company wasn't falling behind.
Critics have been surprised that Apple appears to be falling behind when it comes to AI. How do you respond?
I don't believe we are.
Not too worried.
Not too worried.
Since that interview, the AI landscape has moved fast, and Apple's position in it has only grown more uncertain. So what went wrong with Siri? And can Apple still lead in AI, or is it too late to catch up?
As you just saw, what happened to Apple's Siri? Apple, once the pioneer of mobile AI, has fallen embarrassingly behind in the race for smart assistants. While Google's Gemini rewrites your emails and OpenAI's GPT-4o can hold a conversation across multiple senses, Siri is stuck asking, "Sorry, I didn't quite get that." Today, we're going deep, not into the memes or surface-level complaints, but into the architecture, corporate strategy, privacy philosophy, and internal dysfunction that's holding Siri back. And whether Apple's latest gamble, Apple Intelligence, is too little, too late. Let's rewind to 2011. Apple buys a startup called Siri for around $200 million and integrates it into the iPhone 4S. It was revolutionary back then. A voice assistant that could schedule meetings, send texts, and answer basic questions. But here's what most people don't realize. Siri was built on a template-matching framework. Instead of understanding language like GPT-style models do today, Siri processed speech by matching it to predefined command trees. Think of it like this. Siri isn't reasoning. She's just pattern-matching what you said to a hard-coded response. It's a brittle system that never scaled. Every new command had to be manually added, manually tested, and manually maintained. So while Apple continued polishing hardware and tightening ecosystem control, Siri's brain stayed frozen in 2012. Let's talk about architecture. Modern LLMs like GPT-4, Claude, or Gemini are built on transformer-based neural networks with self-attention mechanisms. They don't just remember, they model context, semantics, probability, and intent. They can reason. They can adapt. But Siri? She's built on a fragmented stack of natural language modules. A speech-to-text module, a semantic parser, a hard-coded intent engine, a dispatcher that tries to map to apps or APIs. Each of these steps has its own failure point. There's no unified intelligence, no shared memory, no deep reasoning. And when Apple tried to modernize Siri in the mid-2010s, they hit a wall. Their entire architecture was inflexible. One former Apple engineer described it as a monolithic mess. Adding new features meant updating multiple subsystems. Even small changes introduced regressions elsewhere. So Apple did what Apple often does: optimize the experience around constraints rather than rewriting it from scratch. That decision would haunt them. Now let's talk about philosophy, because Apple's biggest strength may also be its biggest liability in AI privacy. Apple has staked its brand identity on not collecting user data. No targeted ads. No cross-app tracking. No cloud-based behavioral modeling. And while this is great for user trust, it's terrible for building smart AI systems. Here's why. Modern AI thrives on data. It learns from user patterns. It builds context over time. It adapts to your behavior across devices, apps, and conversations. Apple has intentionally crippled this feedback loop. Unlike Google Assistant or Alexa, Siri doesn't retain history. She doesn't build a memory graph. She doesn't learn that you call your sister M, or that you like dimming the lights when you say, "movie night." Every request is stateless. Every session is a blank slate. And that's not just a Siri thing. It's a company policy. Apple's reluctance to build cloud-based models, to allow real-time personalization, or to collect even anonymized usage data means Siri can't evolve the way other AI systems can. Even in 2025, Apple's newly announced Apple Intelligence will run primarily on-device, offloading only the most complex tasks to the cloud, and only through a privacy-preserving, semantic firewall. It's a noble idea, but it comes at the cost of lagging behind in intelligence, flexibility, and contextual reasoning. Behind the scenes, Apple knows it has a Siri problem. In the past decade, they've acquired over 20 AI startups. They've poached researchers from Google, Microsoft, and DeepMind. They've opened AI labs in Zurich, Seattle, and San Diego. And yet, no breakthrough. Why? Multiple reports suggest that Apple's internal AI teams are siloed. The Siri team operates separately from the ML teams powering photos or keyboard. There's duplication of effort, a culture of secrecy, and a fear of shipping anything that might produce unpredictable results. In fact, according to a 2023 report from The Information, Apple engineers working on Siri repeatedly clashed over infrastructure, training data, and deployment standards. Some even described Siri as technically stuck in the past. Compare that to OpenAI, which iterates in public and pushes boundaries, often to controversy, yes, but also to rapid innovation. At Apple, the risk tolerance is zero, and the innovation suffers. At WWDC 2024, Apple tried to shift the narrative. They unveiled Apple Intelligence, a new foundation for generative AI across the system, including a smarter Siri. The pitch? A unified assistant that could understand app context, perform cross-app actions like show me photos of mom from last weekend and message them to my sister, summarize documents, emails, and notifications, write responses, and even generate images. It was bold, exciting. The demo was slick. But there was one problem. It wasn't ready. Behind the scenes, the version of Siri shown was reportedly based on a prototype model that couldn't scale reliably. According to internal sources, Apple had to delay the rollout of most Siri enhancements due to accuracy issues and edge case failures. In interviews, Craig Federighi admitted that V1 Siri, built with the original architecture, just didn't work like an Apple product. So they scrapped it and started building V2 from scratch. As of mid-2025, that new Siri is still in development. Best case scenario, late 2025 beta. Most likely, spring 2026. And even then, only iPhones with Apple Silicon, meaning M1 or better, will get the full features. That leaves hundreds of millions of users stuck with the old Siri, the one we all know and don't really love. Now, let's be fair. Apple is doing some smart things, finally. They're integrating ChatGPT 4.0 for fallback queries in iOS 18. They've open-sourced MLX, their new machine learning framework for Apple Silicon. They're hiring aggressively for LLM and multimodal AI teams. And they've committed to on-device optimization for models with up to 30 billion parameters. But the question is, can Apple move fast enough? The AI world is evolving weekly. Gemini is pushing real-time multi-agent coordination. OpenAI is moving into voice, vision, and memory. Anthropic is experimenting with 1 million token contexts. Meta is pushing open-source agents into mainstream products. Meanwhile, Siri still stumbles on compound instructions. If Apple wants to compete, it needs to do more than just update Siri. It needs to rethink its AI culture. That means embracing cross-functional teams, opening up third-party access to Siri APIs, allowing secure contextual memory, and yes, trusting the cloud, at least a little. Privacy shouldn't mean paralysis. So why is Siri still bad at AI? Because she's not really AI, not in the modern sense. She's a legacy interface built for a different era. And Apple, for all its brilliance, has spent over a decade tinkering around the edges instead of pulling the plug and rebuilding from the ground up. That's finally starting to change, but slowly, carefully, maybe too carefully. If Siri is ever going to catch up, Apple has to make a philosophical shift. From control to intelligence, from perfectionism to iteration, from walled garden to real understanding. Until then, Siri will remain what she's always been, a beautifully designed assistant, with very little to say. Thanks for watching. If this breakdown gave you new insight into the state of AI and Apple's biggest blind spot, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Have you stopped using Siri too?